Welcome to the deep dive. We've got some really important material to explore with you today.
We certainly do.
It's a document that, well, it really lays the groundwork for how organizations manage their digital risks. A listener actually pointed us to this one.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and we thought it was crucial to sort of unpack it together. Think of us as your guides, walking you through this essential framework.
Exactly. We're diving into the initial chapters of NIST Special Publication 837, Revision 2.
Quite a mouthful.
It is.
Yeah.
The full title is Risk Management Framework for Information Systems and Organizations, a System Lifecycle Approach for Security and Privacy. Sounds dense, maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
But honestly, this framework is kind of the backbone for anyone dealing with information systems, protecting sensitive data. Understanding it can give you a real edge.
For sure. So whether you're, actively managing these kinds of systems or maybe trying to wrap your head around security and privacy at your own workplace.
Or even if you're just curious about how organizations protect their digital stuff.
Exactly. This RMF, the risk management framework, it's fundamental. So our goal in this session is basically to take you through these opening chapters step by step.
Just like they appear in the document, topic by topic.
All right, let's get started then. Chapter 2.
Yep, Chapter 2. It gives you that bird's eye view of the whole framework. And it kicks off with a really core principle,
Okay.
which is that managing security risk and privacy risk too, it isn't just the IT department's problem.
Right. Not siloed away.
No, it spans the entire organization, everyone, from
Yeah.
senior leaders setting the direction right down to the individuals using the systems day to day.
Everyone's got a part to play.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
This understanding that security and privacy are like collective responsibilities. That's the bedrock of the RMF.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You can't just, bolt security on at the end.
It doesn't work.
It has to be baked in, like at every level. And the document talks about a multi-level approach to risk management, which sounds pretty smart.
It is. Very structured. They outline 3 distinct levels, but they're all connected.
Which are?
First, the organization level, the big picture. Then, the mission or business process level, so what the organization is actually trying to do.
Got it. The purpose.
Right. And finally, the information system level. That's where you get down to the specific technologies being used.
Okay, organization, mission, business, and system.
And this multi-level view is really key. Because think about it, a vulnerability at the system level might seem small.
Like one little component.
Yeah, exactly. But when you add it up with other small things across the organization, it could actually become a major strategic risk.
The cumulative effect.
Precisely. And crucially, communication and reporting. That needs to flow both ways, up and down these levels.
So system issues bubble up.
Yep, they need to inform the strategy.
Right.
And then, the high-level decisions about risk, they need to filter back down and shape how those individual systems are managed. It's all interconnected. That's what makes it work.
Okay. Then we hit figure 2 in the document. This shows the 7 steps of the RMF itself.
Right, the core process.
Looks like a cycle. Prepare, categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor. Seems pretty logical, that order.
It is presented sequentially, and prepare definitely comes first. But the document makes a really important point here.
Oh.
Those steps after prepare, they can actually be carried out in a non-sequential order.
Okay. So it's not rigid.
Not at all. It gives organizations flexibility, which you need in the real world, right? Things change.
Definitely.
Oh, and also worth mentioning, there's this little process initiation phase just before prepare, kind of like step 0.
Just getting things rolling.
Yeah, setting the scope, getting commitment,
Yep.
the official kickoff.
Okay, so it's a framework, but designed to be adapted, not just a strict checklist.
Exactly right. That's a huge strength.
And you mentioned flexibility.
Yeah.
It sounds like they really stress that point. Like you have to do the steps and tasks unless they say optional.
Correct. You can't just skip steps.
But how you do them, that's where the flexibility comes in.
Precisely. And they give examples, which is helpful. Like maybe doing tasks in a different order makes more sense for you.
Right.
Or maybe you need to put more focus on certain tasks because of your specific risks. Or even combine some tasks if it's more efficient.
Okay.
And they also point out you can use things like the cybersecurity framework, the CSF, to get more detail on how to carry out these RMF tasks.
So you can leverage other existing standards within this framework. That's useful.
Very. It avoids reinventing the wheel.
And it also sounds like you don't always have to start at step 1, prepare. You can jump in elsewhere.
Absolutely. Let's say you've already done some risk assessments or you have certain activities completed.
Maybe from a previous audit or something?
Could be. Or maybe you do a gap analysis and see where you stand. based on that, and this is key, with approval from your authorizing official.
The senior person who accepts the risk.
That's the one. You can actually enter or re-enter the RMF at whatever step makes the most sense.
So no wasted effort. You focus where you need to.
Exactly. Like if a big new threat pops up, you might jump right back to the assess step for the affected systems.
Makes sense. Okay, let's dive into that first step then. Chapter 2.2, the prepare step. What's the main goal here?
Prepare is really about laying the groundwork, getting everything ready to manage security and privacy risks using the RMF.
Setting the stage.
Pretty much. And this involves doing essential prep activities at all three levels we talked about: organizational, mission business process, and the system level. Table 1 in the doc summarizes these.
Gotcha. And you mentioned one task, P7, continuous monitoring strategy for the organization. That sounds critical today.
It really is.
Yeah.
In today's world, things change so fast. This task is about setting up an organization-wide plan for continuously checking how well your security controls are working.
Not just point-in-time checks.
Right. It's proactive, ongoing. They link it to the detect and identify functions in the cybersecurity framework, actually.
Yeah.
Keeping that constant pulse check.
So after you do all this preparation at the organizational level, what's the main thing you should have? What's the output?
The big one is the organization-level risk assessment results. This gives you that high-level picture of the main security and privacy risks the whole organization is facing.
Kind of sets the context for everything else.
Exactly. It informs the more detailed stuff that happens later at the system level.
And who's driving this? Who are the main players in this organizational prep?
Well, the primary responsibility usually falls to the risk executive function, that senior accountable official, along with the CSO, the Senior Agency Information Security Officer,
Okay.
and the Senior Agency Official for Privacy. But they need support from other senior folks, too.
Like the CIO.
Yep, CIO, mission, or business owners, the people who know the operational side, and definitely the authorizing official, since they'll make the final risk decisions.
So it's a team effort led from the top.
Has to be.
Now, this organizational risk assessment, you said it uses aggregated data. What kind of data are we talking about? What feeds into that big picture?
It pulls together info from a few places. You've got the results from individual system-level risk assessments rolling up.
Okay.
You've got insights from those continuous monitoring activities we just mentioned.
Right.
And then any broader strategic risk considerations. Things like, how does the overall enterprise architecture look? What are the risks of having systems with different impact levels on the same network?
And, importantly, external providers, right, supply chain stuff.
Absolutely critical. The risks coming from relying on outside vendors for services or tech. It's all about building that holistic view of exposure.
Okay. Moving on to Chapter 2.3, this focuses on integrating information security and privacy. They seem tightly linked in the RMF.
They are. And the document really emphasizes that they need to work hand in hand.
They have different goals, though, fundamentally.
Distinct primary objectives, yes. Information security is mainly about protecting confidentiality, integrity, availability, the classic CIA triad from unauthorized activity.
Okay. Protecting the systems and data from hackers, malware, etc.
Right. Privacy, on the other hand, it's focused on compliance with privacy laws and policies and managing risks to individuals that come from processing their personal information, their PII.
And you made this point earlier, privacy risks aren't just about hackers getting in, are they?
That's such a critical distinction, yeah. The document is clear. Privacy risks can come from authorized activities, too.
Like how?
Well, think about decisions on what PII you collect in the first place, how you use it, how long you keep it. Is the data accurate? Are you transparent with people about what you're doing?
Ah, so even if everything is allowed by the rules, it could still create a risk for someone's privacy.
Exactly. It's a broader scope than just preventing breaches.
The document also mentions privacy controls. How are those different from security controls, or are they?
Good question. A privacy control is basically any safeguard, could be administrative, like a policy, technical, like encryption, or physical, like a locked door, that's put in place specifically to meet privacy requirements or manage privacy risks. A security control is focused on protecting the CIA of the system and data from security threats. But, and this is important, often a single control can help achieve both security and privacy goals.
Like encryption, maybe. Protects confidentiality, security, and helps protect PII, privacy.
Perfect example. So often they just call them controls in the guideline because of that overlap.
And integrating privacy isn't just a suggestion, it's required.
It is, at least for federal agencies. They specifically mention OMB Circular A130, which mandates using the RMF and explicitly requires integrating privacy into it.
So you have to think about privacy risks beyond just keeping data confidential.
You got it.
Okay, Chapter 2.4 then talks about defining system and system elements. Getting the terminology right seems important.
It is. You need a common language. They start with the official definition of an information system.
The legal one.
Yeah, but they also stress taking a broader view, thinking about the whole system development lifecycle, or SDLC, and connecting it to architecture and engineering.
Why the broad view?
Because it helps you spot and manage risks, including supply chain risks, across the entire life of the system, not just when it's up and running. They even bring in the IOI definition of a system interacting elements working towards a purpose.
So when they say system, it's not just the computer, hardware, and software.
Definitely not. A system is made up of system elements, and that includes the technology, the machines, sure, but also the people users, admins.
The human element.
Right, and the physical stuff too, buildings, networks, the environment it operates in. All these elements work together.
And they can be implemented in different ways. Hardware, software.
Hardware, software, firmware, physical structures, people, processes, policies, lots of ways.
Okay. And they make a distinction between system element and system component. What's that about?
It's a subtle but useful distinction. A system component is specifically a system element that's implemented using hardware, software, or firmware.
So the tech bits.
Pretty much. Whereas system element is the broader category that includes the people, the physical environment, etc. A server is a component. The person using it is an element.
Got it. And they also talk about the authorization boundary. I think that used to be called the system boundary.
Yeah, they've standardized on authorization boundary now. It basically defines the scope. It clearly marks out which system elements are inside the system that's being authorized for operation by that authorizing official.
So what's in scope for the authorization?
Exactly. And it can also refer to the set of common controls that are authorized centrally and can be inherited by systems within that boundary. Just makes things clear.
Okay, skipping ahead a bit in Chapter 2, Section 2.8 hits on supply chain risk management, SCRM. This feels like a really hot topic lately.
It is. Hugely important. The document points out how much we rely on external providers now for, well, everything. Products, systems, services.
Services, software components.
All of it.
Yeah.
And because we rely on them, the organization becomes responsible, accountable for the risks that come with them.
Right. If your supplier gets breached, it can hit you hard.
Exactly. And these supply chain risks can be tough to manage because you don't have direct control. Plus, they can be widespread.
What do you mean widespread?
Well, they talk about risks being endemic, specific to one provider or system, or systemic, meaning they could affect lots of systems, maybe a whole industry sector, even nationally.
Wow.
And this often happens because supply chains are so global now, so distributed. It's hard to have visibility into everything.
So how does the RMF handle this? Is SCRM separate?
No. And that's key. They stress that SDRM isn't some standalone thing. It's woven into the RMF. SCRM practices are integrated throughout the different steps.
So it's part of the overall risk management.
Absolutely. Ultimately, deciding if the risk from an external provider is acceptable comes down to how much assurance you can get.
Assurance based on what?
Based on how much control you can actually exert over them and what evidence they can give you about their security and privacy controls.
Makes sense. Trust but verify, essentially.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, the document then kind of circles back to flexibility in RMF implementation. Just reminding us that the steps aren't always linear.
Right. They reiterate that point. You might need to iterate. For example, you do an assessment, you find weaknesses.
So you have to go back and fix things, remediate.
Exactly. Then you probably need to reassess to make sure the fix has worked. That's an iterative loop.
Or maybe continuous monitoring flags something.
Perfect example. Monitoring might show a change in the system or the threat landscape that could trigger going back to reassess controls, maybe even reselect or retailor them. It's a dynamic process.
What about applying this whole RMF thing to systems that are already up and running, not just new ones?
That's a really common scenario, and it's very valuable. Applying the RMF to an existing system basically works like a big gap analysis.
Showed you where you stand.
Exactly. How effectively have you really been managing security and privacy risk for that system?
Yeah.
If you find gaps, well, you use the RMF steps to address them.
And if you don't find major issues and the system's already authorized,
then you might be able to move straight into the continuous monitoring phase, step 7, to just maintain that posture.
Okay. The document also gives some tips for streamlining RMF implementation. Any highlights there? Practical advice?
Yeah, some good ones. They really emphasize making the most of that initial prepare step. Get the foundation right.
Makes sense. What else?
Maximize common controls and shared systems. Don't reinvent the wheel for every single system. Use tailored baselines. Use automation where you can.
Automation sounds good.
Definitely helps. Also, scale your effort based on system impact. Low-impact systems shouldn't need the same level of exhaustive effort as high-impact ones.
Right, sizing the effort.
Exactly. Reuse artifacts if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Keep IT complexity down, least functionality. And try to move towards ongoing authorization instead of big periodic reauthorization efforts.
So more continuous, less stop and start.
That's the goal. Makes it more efficient and manageable.
Then there's this focus on developing well-defined security and privacy requirements. Why is that so critical?
Because everything else flows from the requirements. If they aren't clear, consistent, and unambiguous, you're building on shaky ground.
Garbage in, garbage out, kinda.
Sort of, yeah. They stress defining these requirements early in the SDLC, working with senior leadership, get them into your acquisition processes too.
So when you buy or build something new.
Right. They point to another NIST doc, 800-160, for help with defining initial requirements. These requirements then drive your control selection and tailoring.
And you can add requirements later too, like in Agile?
Oh, absolutely. It's not a one-time thing. Requirements can evolve throughout the life cycle, especially with Agile development.
Okay. So, Chapter 2 wraps up by looking closer at the prepare step again, but this time at the system level. Table 2 summarizes the tasks. Let's hit a couple of key ones. Task P8, mission or business focus. What's that about?
This is about drilling down for a specific system. You need to clearly identify what mission, what business functions, what processes does this specific system support.
Why does it exist, basically?
Pretty much. And that involves identifying the assets tied to those functions.
Yeah.
Tangible things like hardware, but also intangible stuff.
Like data, reputation.
Exactly. Data, software, organizational reputation, even individual privacy interests if PII is involved. You need to know what you need to protect based on who cares about it and how it's being used.
Okay. Another one is P11, information lifecycle. Why focus on the lifecycle?
Understanding the whole journey of information from creation or collection through processing, sharing, storage, use, right up to disposal.
The cradle to grave view.
Right. Understanding that helps you see all the points where it needs protection. It informs your risk assessments, where are the vulnerabilities at each stage, and it guides selecting the right controls for each phase.
So you don't just focus on data at rest, for example.
Exactly. Plus, it helps make sure you're doing things right along the way, like, do you have authority to collect this data? Are your processing rules correct? Do you have sharing agreements? Are you keeping it only as long as needed?
All flows from understanding that life cycle.
It really does.
Then task P14, risk assessment system. How's this different from the organizational one?
This one zooms right in on the specific system. It's more granular. You're identifying specific threat sources, potential threat events, system vulnerabilities, the likelihood they'll be exploited.
And the impact if they are.
Right. And prioritizing assets based on that potential impact. Tangible costs, intangible damage like reputation.
And it covers privacy risks here too.
Yes, specifically looking at impacts to individuals from PII processing and how that might affect the organization's mission, legal standing, or reputation. And of course, supply chain risks related to this system's external providers.
Okay. After the assessment comes P15, requirements definition. What's being defined here?
Here, you're nailing down the system's protection needs. Basically, what security and privacy capabilities does this system need to have to bring the risk down to an acceptable level while still doing its job?
So the must-haves for protection.
Exactly. These needs cover security characteristics, system behavior, all reflecting stakeholder priorities. Then, these needs get translated into more formal, detailed security and privacy requirements.
Which come from laws, policies, the risk assessment.
All those sources, yeah. And these requirements are what you'll use to select and tailor the actual controls later. Super important step.
Got it. And briefly, tasks P17, requirements allocation, and P18, system registration.
Allocation is basically assigning those defined requirements to specific system components or the environment, making sure each requirement has a home.
Clear responsibility.
Right. And system registration is formally logging the system with the organization, saying, hey, this system exists, or we're planning it, describing its basics, its security privacy implications.
Puts it on the map.
Exactly. Gets it into the inventory, helps with enterprise architecture, ensures it gets the right level of protection, and tracks its posture. You update this registration later after you categorize the system.
Which brings us neatly to Chapter 3, and the first real step after prepare. Categorize. Section 3.2. Table 3 gives the overview here. What's the core purpose of categorize?
Fundamentally, categorize is about figuring out the potential impact if things go wrong, specifically the adverse impact from losing confidentiality, integrity, or availability for the system and its information.
Impact on who?
Could be the organization itself, individuals whose PII is involved, maybe other organizations it connects to, or even sometimes national interests. You need to understand the potential damage level.
Okay. And the first task is C1, system description. Sounds straightforward.
It is, but essential. You need to document the system's characteristics thoroughly. What it does, what data it handles, who uses it, how it connects.
The foundation for the categorization.
Exactly. You can't categorize what you don't understand.
Then C2, security categorization. How do you actually do that?
It's a systematic process. You look at the system itself and also the different types of information it handles. For each, you assess the potential impact, usually high, moderate, or low, if you lose confidentiality, integrity, or availability.
So C, I, and A, impact levels for the system and its data types.
You got it. And these results get documented in your security plan, privacy plan, SCRM plan, and they need to line up with your enterprise architecture and your overall risk strategy.
Okay. And the last task here is C3, security categorization review and approval. Sounds like a critical checkpoint.
It absolutely is. The categorization results need to be reviewed and formally approved by senior leaders.
Who specifically?
Well, if the system handles PII, the senior agency official for privacy reviews and approves first. Then it goes to the authorizing official, the AO.
And what's the AO checking?
They're making sure the category makes sense for the mission, that it's consistent with other systems in the organization, and that it fits the overall risk strategy. They work with the risk executive on this.
And if they don't approve?
Back to the drawing board. You have to redo the categorization and resubmit it. Once it is approved, that info gets updated in the system registration we talked about earlier.
Right, closing that loop. Okay, that's categorize. Next up is section 3.3, the select step. Table 4 summarizes this one. What's the main goal in select?
Select is all about choosing the right controls. You need to select, then tailor, and finally document the security and privacy controls that are appropriate for the level of risk you identified.
Controls that match the categorization impact level.
Precisely, commensurate with risk.
Task S1 is control selection. How do you pick the controls? Is there a menu?
Kinda, yeah. There are two main ways. One is using predefined baseline controls. Think NIST SP 800-53 sets of controls based on impact levels.
So you start with the low, moderate, or high baseline.
Generally, yes. Your security categorization and requirements guide which security baseline to start with. Your privacy risk assessment and requirements guide the privacy baseline selection.
What's the other way?
Organizations can also generate their own set of controls, maybe based on industry standards or unique needs. But either way, baseline or custom, you select first, then you tailor.
Tailoring comes next.
Right. And they also mention using systems engineering processes, like from ISO 15288 or NIST 800-160 and maybe CSF profiles to help guide this selection.
Okay, so task S2 is control tailoring. Why tailor? Aren't the baselines good enough?
Baselines are great starting points, but they're generic.
Yeah.
Every organization, every system is unique. You need to tailor based on your specific mission, your specific threats, identified risks, including supply chain stuff, the type of system, your organization's risk tolerance.
Lots of factors. So what does tailoring involve?
Several things. You might identify common controls provided centrally that your system can just inherit.
Saves effort.
Big time. You might apply scoping considerations. Maybe a control isn't fully applicable. You might select compensating controls if a baseline one isn't feasible.
Like using a different method to achieve the same goal?
Exactly. You also assign values to parameters within the controls, maybe supplement the baseline with extra controls for specific risks, and provide detailed specs for how you'll implement them. The justification needed often depends on the system's impact level.
Higher impact, more justification needed for tailoring choices.
Makes sense, right? And controls related to the SDLC and SCRM often need careful tailoring too.
Okay, after selecting and tailoring, we get S3, control allocation. What's happening here?
Allocation is about assigning responsibility for each control. Where does it live? Is it system-specific, managed entirely by the system?
Okay.
Is it hybrid, where responsibility is shared between a central provider and the system?
Like, the central IT provides the platform security, but the system team manages application-level access.
Good example. Or is it a common control provided entirely by a central entity,
Yeah.
and the system just inherits it, like maybe physical building security?
Gotcha. So, assigning each control to system-specific, hybrid, or common.
Right. And this allocation needs to fit with your enterprise architecture, your security privacy architectures, and the requirements you allocated earlier. Not every control goes on every element, just where the capability is needed.
Okay. Then S4 is documentation of planned control implementations, putting it all in writing.
Yep. This is where your formal security plan and privacy plan come together. They document the requirements, the controls you selected, and tailored.
And how you plan to implement them.
Exactly. Enough details so someone can actually implement them correctly and so they can be assessed later. If you're using common controls, you identify them, but don't need to detail their implementation in this system's plan.
Because that's documented elsewhere.
Right. And for hybrid controls, you clearly spell out who does what, the provider's part and the system's part.
Clear lines of responsibility. Makes sense. Task S5 is Continuous Monitoring Strategy System. We saw the organizational one earlier.
Right, this is the system-specific version. You develop a monitoring strategy just for this system, outlining how you'll keep checking its controls over time. But it has to align with and support that overall organizational strategy you set up back in the prepare step.
Consistency is key.
Very much so.
And finally, for Select, Task S6 is Plan Review and Approval. Another approval gate.
Yep. The security plan and the privacy plan need to be reviewed and formally approved by the authorizing official or their designated rep.
Before you start building or implementing.
Ideally, yes. It signifies they accept the plan's security and privacy approach for the system before you start implementing the controls. It's a crucial check.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground there. The overview, prepare, categorize, and select. That's a huge chunk of the initial setup.
It really is. Getting these foundational steps right, understanding the context, categorizing the impact, selecting and tailoring the right controls, it's absolutely critical for the rest of the framework to work effectively.
Absolutely. It feels like if you understand these first few steps, you've really got the core logic of the RMF down. It sets you up for the implement, assess, authorize, and monitor phases.
Couldn't agree more. That groundwork is essential.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As you've heard us walk through this, think about an information system you know well, maybe one at work, or even something complex you use personally.
Yeah, good exercise.
How could you apply these ideas, prepare, categorize, select to that system? And maybe more interestingly, what do you think the initial roadblocks or challenges would be if you tried to implement this kind of formal risk management approach?
It's a good question to ponder. What hurdles would you hit first? Definitely something to think about until our next deep dive.